Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is, for all intents and purposes, today. Yes, that means I'm pre-recording a show. It means I'm doing it ahead of time. It means I don't know what I'm going to do next. And I have 2 hours ahead of me, 1 hour. I don't know. We're going to see what we got in store for you. We'll see what comes out this Friday, December 23rd, 2022. And as I said, I'll be away from the microphone and out and about and probably in terrible weather, too. So I got to look out, be careful where I'm going. In the meantime, I wanted to leave you with something to listen to while you stay safe and warm at home, hopefully. And it was easy to decide how to start this collection of stories. Where we're going to go from here, a little bit more difficult. But I did want to bring you this bit of information that I couldn't cram into our Thursday show. I mentioned to you that David Korn had done some additional work for Mother Jones on the now fascinating story of fake AI chatbot George Santos elected to Congress and all the things that were wrong with his resume. We've been over and over a number of those things. He has had a new development that was available for us on Thursday. We just couldn't fit it in. He has teamed up with Noah Lannard to bring you this piece in Mother Jones. Scandal struck George Santos just revived the firm that netted him mystery millions. His mysterious financial rise in financial fortunes, even more, what shall we say, a steeper climb. I was going to say more precipitous, but I mean, that's sort of generally indicates it's going in the other direction. Anyway, a meteoric rise, the other terminology I don't really like for this sort of stuff. He rocketed from low to middling pay, certainly for somebody who claims to be a financial whiz, to fantastic stratospheric pay very, very quickly, much more quickly than I thought I understood to be the case from the previous readings. So on to this one here. Right, he's just now revived the firm that netted him mystery millions. I'd be reviving it every day if I could. The subheader says, after the New York Times expose, the incoming Republican congressman made a curious move. So this is like this week that he's done this thing. On Monday, the New York Times, as you know, published an explosive story revealing that George Santos, a New York Republican elected last month to the House of Representatives, had made what appeared to be brazenly false statements about his background, including assorted claims about his business career. We didn't really get to that part of it. We just thought that was confusing. That was about it. He had boasted of being an accomplished investor and financier who had worked at Goldman Sachs and Citigroup, yet each firm noted it had no record of his employment there. He said he had graduated from Baruch College. The school said he had not. That's pretty blunt. His personal finances seemed odd as well, and he had worked at a Florida company called Harbor City Capital. That's the only one that would verify his employment, and that one was accused by the Securities and Exchange Commission in 2021. That's like just the other day, of running a $17 million Ponzi scheme. Subsequently, he supposedly made at least $3.5 million from a mysterious company called DeVolder Organization, LLC. That's his company, the one he started, that had no public profile, that was dissolved soon after it was created. And among other things, this marked a dramatic shift from his first run for Congress in 2020 when he reported earning $55,000 per year. We started to get figures of $750,000 or more. He made $3.5 million as soon as he started the DeVolder Organization, and then as soon as he made it, he dissolved the company. Why would you do that? This sounds really strange. The day after the Times story appeared, Santos took a curious step. He revived the mystery firm that he had claimed as the source of millions of dollars of income, and he listed its address. And as its address, a Florida property associated with a former top official of the company that allegedly mounted that Ponzi scheme. You wouldn't normally want to go back into business with those guys. DeVolder's resurrection was first reported by Talking Points memo. The story of this firm is a key component of the Santos scandal. The Times article cast Santos as a modern-day Mr. Ripley, who seemingly had manufactured a rags-to-riches public persona based on audacious lies. I'd say that's about right. He was once arrested in Brazil for forging checks. He boasted that he'd founded an animal rescue charity, but the outfit barely existed and was not registered with the IRS as a nonprofit. The intended beneficiary of one of its events reported never receiving the funds from a fundraiser that Santos's group helped to organize. Before the election, Santos said he owned a, quote, Hamptons mansion, unquote, worth $10 million. But according to his financial disclosure filings, he owned no real estate at the time. He was then renting an apartment in Queens. That's very different from the Hamptons mansion. All the unsubstantiated claims have prompted questions about his financial and business dealings, including DeVolder and his interactions with Harbor City and its principals. After working at a firm that ran conferences for investors and earning $55,000 in salary there, Santos in July of 2020 was hired as a New York regional director for Harbor City, which sought investors for a business generating digital customer leads to sell. In a press release announcing this move, J.P. Maroney, Harbor City's CEO, said he had known Santos for years and called him a perfect fit. That's interesting. So now how would you like to be trapped being called a perfect fit for a Ponzi scheme? Anyway, at the time, Santos was mounting his first bid for Congress in Long Island, which he would lose that November. And by the way, he actually is a perfect fit for running a Ponzi scheme. That's quite correct. They're absolutely right about that. When Santos joined Harbor City, the company was already in trouble. Weeks earlier, the Alabama Securities Commission had prohibited Harbor City from doing business in the state. It alleged that the company was run by, quote, fraudsters who were, quote, out to deceive Alabamians and profit off unsuspecting investors by using dazzling marketing tactics to sell unregistered bonds. That does not sound very good. In April of 2021, the SEC filed its complaint charging that the firm and Maroney had mounted an extensive Ponzi scheme. The agency maintained that Maroney pocketed more than $4.8 million of the $17.1 million that he raised from investors and used that money to pay $1.35 million in personal credit card bills, buy a $90,000 Mercedes-Benz, and purchase a waterfront home. The only other person named in the complaint was Maroney's wife. No other Harbor City employees were implicated. In October, Maroney, who is representing himself, oh boy, requested a stay in the SEC action against him in Harbor City, noting that he, quote, is currently the target in a related criminal investigation. Okay, I don't know why that would help you. Maroney did not respond to messages requesting comment. Santos has said he was unaware of the alleged Ponzi operation. Scott Silver, a Florida attorney who has represented Harbor City investors allegedly bilked, said there should have been many red flags for Santos and other employees. Any person from the financial services industry who went to work for a company like Harbor City should immediately have recognized that Harbor City wasn't properly registered as a financial services company, Silver told Mother Jones. Even if you didn't know the company was operating as a fraud or a Ponzi scheme, a sophisticated person affiliated with the company should have known that they weren't licensed to do what they claimed to be doing. I mean, yeah. Weeks after the SEC leveled its accusation against Maroney and Harbor City, Santos formed DeVolder Organization, LLC, and incorporated it in Florida. His full name, of course, is George DeVolder Santos. The registered agent for DeVolder was D&D International Investment Services. That company is run by Devon Dames, who served as Harbor City's chief financial officer. Oh, great. Around the same time, Dames also formed a company for another Harbor City executive, Paul Nicolini. When Mother Jones called a number associated with Nicolini, the person who answered immediately hung up after hearing Santos's name. What DeVolder did is unclear. On a campaign website in 2021, Santos described it as his family's firm and said he was managing member who oversaw asset allocations of $80 million. That's in scare quotes here, asset allocations. There is nothing in the public record that explains how he and his family supposedly came to oversee such a large fortune. The Times reports that Santos was evicted from apartments in Queens in 2015 and 2017. He later claimed to be a landlord impacted by a New York eviction moratorium, though his financial disclosure filings contained no information indicating he owned property in the United States. That's a real puzzling one. Like, why even get into that argument? You think you're going to become famous arguing about this stuff on the internet? I mean, no one cares if you're losing money, and you really weren't. Anyway, in April of 2022, that's this year, Santos provided a different description of DeVolder to the Daily Beast. He said he had started DeVolder to help, quote, all the people who were left adrift by Harbor City. Oh, that's nice of him. He also said that the firm had by then been dissolved, so he didn't really want to help them very much, I guess, or at least not for very long. On the financial disclosure form Santos filed in September of 2022, and that's just a couple months ago, he characterized DeVolder in yet another way, calling it a capital intro consulting company. That's what we heard, the last report. Right, he stated that he had earned $750,000 in salary between $1 million and $5 million in dividend income from DeVolder in 2021 and the same amounts in 2022. This means he claimed he pulled in between $3.5 million and $11.5 million from a firm that existed for less than a year, that produced no public signs of any work, not even a website, and that he has not described consistently. Santos also stated in his 2022 form that he had a checking account worth between $100,000 and $250,000 and a savings account worth between $1 million and $5 million. His 2020 financial disclosure form listed no such accounts and no such assets. It's really interesting. I mean, and it may be the case, it may turn out to be the case that he doesn't have any of those assets. I don't know which one would look worse. Just simply not having any of those assets and having been lying your ass off about being rich but not really being rich. I mean, I guess there's no crime in that. Maybe there's no crime in the other thing either, but it's certainly more indicative of maybe something criminal going on if you did have the assets, but you just didn't have any explanation for why you had them. I don't know which one works out worse in the end. Anyway, as the Times noted, the DeVolder organization has no public-facing assets or other property that the Times could locate. Mr. Santos's disclosure form did not provide information about clients that would have contributed to such a haul, a seeming violation of the requirement to disclose any compensation in excess of $5,000 from a single source. Kedrick Payne, the vice president of the Watchdog Campaign Legal Center and a former deputy chief counsel of the Office of Congressional Ethics, was one of 3 election law experts consulted by the Times who took issue with the lack of detail. Now back to Mother Jones. An online biography for Dames, whose company served as the registered agent for DeVolder, described Dames as a, quote, seasoned executive with investment experience and more than $1.5 billion in transactions between the Bahamas and the USA, unquote. I don't know why that's particularly special. I mean, I know it's a offshore banking center, but I mean, we had more than $1.5 billion in transactions. Like, okay, so what? Were they yours? Were they on behalf of someone else? Did you buy things, make things, sell things? What happened? Whatever the source of the money Santos received from DeVolder, if he received it, he used his newfound wealth, if he has it, to lend his winning campaign $700,000. Santos did not respond to multiple requests from the Times for information about his background and career. His lawyer, Joe Murray, posted a statement on Twitter saying that the Times was attempting to, quote, smear Santos's good name, he doesn't have one, with defamatory allegations, but Murray provided no support for any of his client's implausible claims. Right after the Times story hit, Santos resurrected DeVolder. And, I mean, like, why would you bother unless you really were drawing some money from it? But I guess to keep up the appearances of fakeness, I have no, I mean, I guess not the appearances of fakeness, but trying to lend some substance to back the fakeness. But wow. All right. According to Florida corporate records, he reinstated the firm on Tuesday, like the day after the story, and now a couple days ago. On the filing he submitted, he reported that the company was based at a Merritt Island, Florida address that corresponds to a property owned by Jason Benoit, who was the former chief technology officer of Harbor City. Wow, I was working with everybody at Harbor City. Benoit runs a firm called Jason Benoit and Associates that has provided website services to a pro-Trump political action committee called Republican Reset PAC. The main strategic consultant for this PAC is Resilient Patriot, a firm headed by Michael Flynn, the former national security advisor to Donald Trump and notorious international spy. Of course, Benoit did not respond to a interview request. According to Florida business records, Santos and Benoit have also both been managers of a political consulting firm called Red Strategies USA. That's right. Another Florida-based company set up by dames in the weeks after the SEC exposed the alleged Ponzi scheme at Harbor City. Wow. Okay. The two other Harbor City alumni were listed as authorized managers of Red Strategies, Dames and Nicolini. These guys are sticking together. It's interesting. Red Strategies worked on the campaign of Tina Forte. We heard about that. The Republican who unsuccessfully challenged Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in the recent election. That's why it was so strange to me that Santos is running for Congress, but is also a principal in a consulting firm working on a different race right there in New York. Forte's campaign paid Red Strategies USA $110,000 between June 2021 and December 2021 for, quote, digital consulting and fundraising, unquote. According to campaign finance records, the firm was dissolved in September before the election was over. That is unusual also. Mother Jones sent a list of questions to Santos and Murray, his attorney, regarding DeVolder, the firm's reinstatement, and Santos's personal finances. I'm not going to be able to respond, Murray replied, and that's it. That's all he had to say, and that's all David Korn and his co-writer on this piece, getting back to the top here, Noah Leonard, that's all they've got for Mother Jones. But that's plenty, just another big set of oversized question marks. It's really crazy. I'd love to know what's at the bottom of all this and find out whether he actually has any money or not. I wonder whether he's even faking that. And if so, how can I fake that? Because I'd like to have just a little bit of that for a couple of projects I'd like to work on. One of them called Get Me Some Awesome Stuff. It's a little thing I've been working on for a long time and hasn't panned out yet. And I was just wondering when I could have lots of money. And I thought maybe this was a great way to do it. Speaking of which, yeah, here's the latest fantasy project. I have this in mind. I assume at some point in the relatively near future, everybody is going to end up buying electric vehicles. And I'm not in the market for a new car at this point yet. And, knock on wood, not for a long time. I mean, we're not really ready financially, but I guess I figure because that's the case that my next car will be an electric vehicle, and my family will love this stupid idea. Ready for this one? I've been reading some articles about people electrifying classic cars, including classic Land Rovers. And if you know me personally, family members, etc., know that I've been storing essentially a large 1967 Land Rover in my garage, more or less since we bought it, because it's a very difficult car to keep running if you don't have, dedicated garage space to keep maintaining the thing. And anyway, I thought this would be either a fitting use of or a fitting death for the Land Rover at some point. The Land Rover has been modified in the past, and that's the source of a lot of its continuing problems. But these electrical modifications appear to actually work. Of course, the issue is they're enormously expensive, although they have gotten it to the point where they are able to convert a car like the Land Rover to an electric vehicle for what in the end is less than the cost of buying a new electric vehicle, even a not particularly high-end one. But, $50,000 or so would probably do it, which is also enough to buy a, mid-range electric vehicle. And really the smart play there, I think, is to just go with the brand new thing and not the thing that could have lots of other ancillary problems. But what's cool about a Chevy Volt, really, when you could have an electric-powered classic Land Rover that looks and feels like the real thing, except, on the other hand, is it a crime to, convert to an electric engine an actual viable classic vehicle? And the answer is, if you're going to drive it around when it's electric, but you're not going to drive it around when it's gas powered, yes, it's not, or rather, no, it's not a crime. What was my question originally? Anyway, I just thought that was fantastically enticing. And Bill Gates, if you're listening and you would like to do something fun for me, you could help me electrify this fantastic it's a 1967 Series 2A 109 station wagon. It's beautiful, and if we could fix up the frame and put an electric engine in it, it would be an awesome thing to drive around. And the fact that it's been done with these classic Land Rovers before makes me think it's actually possible. It's just that's way out of my hands in terms of capability, way out of my wheelhouse. I've done some things that were already outside of my wheelhouse, but I learned to do them to get the car running in the first place. But now it's outpaced what I'm able to do. So anyway, if you are Bill Gates or know Bill Gates, or I would even accept it from Elon Musk at this point, just give me the money and let's get the thing done. And in fact, a lot of the very successful conversions have been done with Tesla batteries, motors, and drivetrains. Which I guess is maybe highly questionable these days. But Tesla, I'm not buying a Tesla and driving it around. No one would know. It would be very stealthy. But apparently their car guts work very well with this sort of conversion. Anyway, so there's the big fantasy. You want to do that? Why don't I just declare myself to have a Waldman Organization LLC? And it's paying me $3.5 million. The most disappointing thing to find out about George Santos would be that he's actually faking the money too, because that would mean there's no way that I could also copy him and just give myself $3.5 million and have it. It probably required stealing it from someone else, which is a terrible thing in and of itself. But this guy moved in Republican circles. He probably stole that money from another Republican. Maybe I would be okay with stealing money from a Republican. None of the discussion of this whole thing, and this is why I'm wondering, does he really have this money or not? None of the discussion has been about people saying, well, I gave you that money. You have to give it back. I gave it to you under a different impression, under the with the stipulation that you had a business, but now you don't. But I don't see anybody asking for this money back. And could I get on this wagon and have the $3.5 million? So many fun things that I would do, including taking a day off to do nothing. Anyway, so I just found that fascinating. I find the whole story fascinating. And I also found myself wondering, is there somebody in my audience that knows how to convert this Land Rover to electric and can help me do it? And then we'll see. Or you could all just send gobs of money and I could do it, and I could podcast about, what, if I were Martha Stewart, I could make this happen. I mean, if I were Martha Stewart, I guess I could just steal the money outright. But then, well, she went to jail for that. Her real brilliance was in saying, I love decorating houses and cooking stuff. And what I would like to do is start a television show where I do that. And then all the expenses of my doing that, all the ingredients, all the houses that I redecorate and paint, and all the decorations that go in them are all business expenses. And I don't pay for any of it, and I just move around between a large number of luxury homes, tastefully decorated, all paid for by my business venture. And I've never really been able to mentally come up with a picture of the business venture that lets me have the cool stuff that I need, except to the extent that some number of you are willing to provide some support for doing this show, which I guess is really, there's my one sort of dream come true. This is a fabulously fun thing to do. It doesn't pay anywhere near Martha Stewart money, but the fact that I'm able to do it at all and not go bankrupt, like immediately, it's going to take me several years to get there. And that I credit to you, the people who are dragging this out and making it more painful. Eventually, it all comes crashing down, but I haven't stolen anything, and that's the good news. All right. I got to move on from this, so who knows what I'll admit to next. I have this item to add that I think is of some importance as well. As you know, we discussed yesterday that there was a deal in place to get this big end-of-the-year omnibus spending bill passed. We also mentioned that there was a rider included in it for the Electoral Count Reform Act. And, it's a good step forward. We admitted and said, all right, it's good to try and address some of the shenanigans that went on behind the actual insurrection on January 6th. But we've had our doubts about, well, how much of this is really preventable if you are dealing with people who are really willing to suspend the Constitution and throw out all laws to get what they want. Well, and remember, this is the crowd that says that gun crimes can't be stopped by laws because criminals don't obey laws. And once again, every Republican accusation is a confession, and they have no intention of obeying the Electoral Count Reform Act. So how good could it be? One of the constant critics of the various proposals was the famous election lawyer Mark Elias, who's risen to fame and prominence with some well-deserved fame and prominence with outstanding performance in court from 2020 onward, and I'm sure from 2020 beforehand as well, but he's really risen to prominence since being the one very often to take on the Kraken lawyers and others with their crazy schemes. And he was a big critic of it generally in terms of, saying, give it a shot, but I don't think it's going to work. I think there's too many workarounds. The real problem is these guys are outlaws, and there's not that much you can do to constrain outlaws with new laws. But he now says that this current version is different and interesting and perhaps merits passage at this stage. He says in this piece from yesterday, the 22nd, it is time to reform the Electoral Count Act. That's always been true. But more specifically, he now supports the passage not only of this omnibus bill because of what's in it, but he actually supports the Electoral Count Reform Act provision that's included. And he says it this way: with the midterms behind us, Democrats in Congress face a rush of last-minute legislation to consider in the current lame duck session. None is as important as the Electoral Count Reform Act, or ECRA, which I'm thrilled was included in Congress's omnibus spending bill. While it is limited in its scope and fails to address many other threats to our election systems, namely voter suppression, the ECRA will nevertheless strengthen our democracy in advance of the 2024 presidential election. It is no secret that I have long been skeptical of efforts to reform the Electoral Count Act of 1887, the original ECA, the archaic law that sets the rules for how presidential electors are certified and counted by Congress. After the attack on the U.S. Capitol on January 6, 2021, reforming the ECA became a top priority in preventing another election subversion event in the future. Traditionally, the January 6th following a presidential election is merely a ceremonial affair. States send their electoral college votes to Congress for the vice president and both chambers of Congress to certify. In the aftermath of 2020, the failed one-term President Donald Trump and his supporters exploited the vulnerabilities of the ECA to fuel Trump's attempts to overturn the election results and pressure then Vice President Mike Pence to reject valid votes. While the ECA should have been updated years ago, the attack on the Capitol in 2021 prompted a more urgent campaign to reform this antiquated law, resulting in a bipartisan bill introduced in July of 2022. Now, originally, Mark tells you, I opposed the passage of this new bill, which was championed by a group of 16 U.S. senators, because I believed it risked doing more harm than good. As I wrote this past July, the ECA reform bill is, in its current form, is not ready for enactment. Lacking precision in critical areas, the bill feels less like the product of legislative compromise and more like something constructed in a law school faculty lounge. And it is impractical in ways that practicing lawyers would recognize, but Washington think tanks might ignore. I think we did read this article, in fact. That was before Senator Amy Klobuchar of Minnesota took charge and made significant improvements to the bill. She did this first and foremost by listening to and engaging with not just professors, but practitioners as well. That means him. He was sick of them listening to the eggheads and he wanted him to talk to him. But, so now he's happy. But okay, that's the way it often works. The result was a bipartisan bill introduced in September that vastly improved the prior text released by Senators Susan Collins, who's very concerned about it, and Joe Manchin, who's no great shakes himself, in July. Those two together, me and you together, forget about it, right? Well, that's a pretty awful combination, actually. As I previously noted, the July version could have been read to severely limit the ability of courts to overturn a false certification by a partisan governor. Now, I definitely remember reading this one because I agreed with this part. Luckily, in this year's midterm elections, most election denier candidates for governor lost, but these defeats are no guarantee in the future. Thankfully, the current text makes clear that a governor's determination of who won their state's election is subject to broad judicial review. Second, the previous version of the bill placed too much emphasis on the role of federal courts, virtually excluding state courts. As we have seen this year in states like Georgia, New York, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, state courts play a significant role in protecting voting rights, which is exactly why Republicans have repeatedly attacked this form of judicial oversight. The ECRA needed to directly reflect the importance of state court review in election disputes. Once again, the current bill does just that. Finally, the prior text provided a federal court process whereby cases would be heard by a 3-judge panel and then, if appealed, automatically reviewed by the U.S. Supreme Court. I previously noted that in 2020, the Supreme Court wisely chose not to accept for review a single case brought by Trump or his allies. Klobuchar heard those concerns and improved the text so that future Supreme Court review would be discretionary rather than automatic. To some, these changes may seem small, but in practice, these changes make a big difference. In fact, it is often those seemingly minor details that have ripple effects, especially in our elections. We saw this earlier this month ahead of the Georgia U.S. Senate runoff when a particular interpretation of one provision of the state's voter suppression law resulted in more than 70,000 Georgians casting their ballots on the Saturday after Thanksgiving. Likewise, we are seeing the right wing invest millions of dollars into promoting the so-called independent state legislature theory because the role of state court review of state election laws often means the difference between fair maps and partisan gerrymanders. This theory, if adopted by the Supreme Court in the case Moore v. Harper, would, at its extreme, block state courts from being able to interpret and apply their own state constitutions when resolving congressional redistricting disputes and reviewing voter suppression laws, and instead give that authority over to the federal judiciary. While we won't know the court's final decision until next year, the revised version of the ECRA places much needed emphasis on state courts and the role that they play in our elections. Although my support of the ECRA was not a given, Senate Democrats worked tirelessly to improve a bill so that all progressives can see it as a bill worth passing. I am thrilled to now support the ECRA and urge both chambers of Congress to pass it as soon as possible. So that's a nice improvement in the fortunes for the ECRA. And if you don't get it, but do trust Mark Elias, then you'll probably be just okay with it and move forward. If you get it all by yourself, fantastic. You probably have some more digesting to do with that piece. But yeah, I mean, I'm interested in the fact that we had many of the same objections or similar objections, I think, to the last version of it. And if he seems satisfied that they've been markedly improved, I'll certainly take him at his word. I don't have time to be reviewing it like that, but I would like to take a look and maybe digest some other reviews of it. But I think we probably will find that the bill is passed before we get a chance to actually do something like that. All right. So let's see. Other things that I wanted to share with you. There are many. Let me jump back to the George Santos content for just a moment. Welcome to the George Santos Show. I do have another piece here that I thought might go well on the record. And if I had really been inclined to do this correctly, I would have just stopped things and recorded this, and then I'd splice it in after the other George Santos story. But this gives us the feel of the live program, the only difference being that we're not stopping for breaks, which you're probably just beginning to notice. You can still pause and go to the bathroom. That's okay to do that. And if you want to hum the break music in your head while you're doing it, that's your business. Anyway, this piece for Semaphore, that brand new publication with all sorts of good writers who are in it, and they have that really weird structure to it, like where they tell you the fact-based story and then they give you their take on it, but separated out in a different section of the story. Kind of interesting. Anyway, this one is from Kadia Goba, Kadia, Kadia. And Kadia writes on the Democrat who lost to the alleged fraudster. It says he tried to warn you. This is a piece basically for all the people who said, how come nobody ever told me about George Santos? I think Greg hinted that these stories were now coming out, that the Democrat in the race said, believe me, I tried. I tried to tell everybody who would listen, and just nobody would listen. So let's see how they reported here. Republican Congressman-elect George Santos is engulfed in the scandal of a lifetime before even taking the oath of office, after the New York Times reported huge portions of his biography appeared to be catch me if you can style fiction. Really kind of all of it, not just huge portions. But the scale of his alleged deception is so glaring, that even cursory fact checks seemed likely to find holes. And so glaring, in fact, that it's already spawned a secondary scandal. How did both news outlets and Democratic opposition researchers in the largest metro area in America miss this until after the election? Until after two elections. Although a lot of this garbage took place between the two elections, I will say that. They might not have been able to discover it in his first election because he was just a regular schmuck in his first election. Now he's a fabulous schmuck. Anyway, both a fabulous and fabulist schmuck. Just in case you were wondering, did I mean one or the other? Both. We always knew Santos was running a scam against the voters in our congressional district. Robert Zimmerman, Santos's Democratic opponent in the race, told Semaphore, and we raised many of these issues and questions, but we were drowned out in a governor's race where crime was the focus. And I was worried that might be the case, and turns out it really was. While his campaign didn't have the full story, Zimmerman pointed to breadcrumbs that were publicly available during the race that the press failed to follow in time to give the voters a clearer picture of Santos. A Cook Political Report evaluation of the race quoted a, quote, senior House GOP aide, saying they were concerned about his business background and were, quote, not touching him with a 10-foot pole, which is too bad because I think that's the sort of thing that George might like. Well, anyway, a DCCC opposition research book largely focused on his ties to January 6th ralliers and his positions on abortion, but did note his purported animal rescue group did not appear to be registered with the IRS. That's that's a strong thing to stack on top of all the rest of them, but kind of out there on its own. It's like the guy's trying to help animals. Well, get out of his face. Except he's not. And that becomes obvious once you see the other things about which he's lying. Anyway, The Leader, a local news outlet that covers Long Island's North Shore, reported Santos's filings in 2020 were $5,000 and then leaped to $11 million. The article quoted an anonymous Republican leader saying, "Are we being played as extras in the talented Mr. Santos?" That guy was really onto it, or, whoever it was. The New York Times expose ended up going much further, finding no evidence to support his claims that he worked at Goldman Sachs and Citigroup, or graduated from Baruch College, or that he was a landlord who'd been hurt by pandemic policies protecting renters from eviction, among many other revelations. Reporters also found no support for a claim that he had, quote, lost 4 employees in the 2016 Pulse nightclub shooting in Orlando, in which a gunman killed 49 people. Almost 10% of the death toll was apparently his company, allegedly. In campaign ads, Santos portrayed himself as trying to, quote, save his family's dream after growing up in an immigrant household, and emphasized a tough stance on crime, in line with other New York Republicans. With the race now over, Zimmerman is calling for an immediate investigation by the House Ethics Committee, and by U.S. Attorney's Office as well. Democratic sources expect him to run again, but Zimmerman is hedging for now when asked about his future plans. Today is not the day to talk about my political agenda, Zimmerman told Semaphore. Okay. Santos did not return requests for comment. His attorney Joe Murray told Axios earlier, George Santos represents the kind of progress that the left is so threatened by. A gay? No. Latino? Maybe. Immigrant? No. And Republican? I guess so, who won a Biden district in overwhelming fashion by showing everyday voters that there's a better option than the broken promises and failed promises of policies of the Democratic Party. We read that quote yesterday, right? He offered no apparent rebuttal, though, to any of the New York Times' story's individual claims. So there you go. Just one more entry in the George Santos saga. It really is becoming quite fascinating, to say the very least. And how odd that I should say now, to say the very least, after having spent about 16 hours on it this week. I don't think that's anything I could say I did the very least on. Not that one. Oh, guess what? Actually, there's at least one more. I guess I should say at least one more. I've forgotten how many things about George Santos are in pocket here. This might as well be George Santos Day. Katia Goba has another one for Semaphore, this time in cooperation with Benji Sarlin. Republicans, how do you like this one, may want George Santos to stick around despite everything. And I think what they want is a Republican to occupy his seat that they can use for a vote to control the House. They would probably prefer he get the hell out of there. But if he resigns or they kick him out or anything like that, then it's a toss-up about who wins the seat and, may lose it to the Democrats. And essentially, it's about having the razor-thin majority that they've got. They can't afford to do the right thing, even if anyone thought they ever would. So what do we got here? It's funny. They're illustrated the piece with a picture of Kevin McCarthy and I guess, Steve Scalise there, and what's her name? Elise Stefanik is there as well, doing the leadership conference thing. And, superimposed over the picture of them is the old quote from Donald Rumsfeld, right? Something about, you go to war with the army you have, not the army you want or wish for or hope to have at some future time, whatever the hell he said, right? Well, so it just says the army you have there. And I think we all get the point. It's been days since Republican Congressman-elect George Santos was caught by the New York Times, allegedly faking just about every element of his biography, and the GOP response has been muted so far. Most notably, Republican leader Kevin McCarthy has yet to weigh in. This was published on the 21st, so that's Wednesday. And I don't think he did anything in the days afterwards either. So don't hold your breath waiting for the party to push Santos out. He may be the beneficiary of an unusual Congress in which almost no crime is worth losing a functional vote in the House. That's really about it. Here, we're offered Kadia and Benji's view, and I don't believe that in the last Semaphore article that she offered her own view. Now that I think about it, she declined to do that and was happy to give you just the straight reporting on it. So that's interesting too. It's not mandatory. They're not forcing them to give their view, and whatever. I guess that's probably a good way of approaching it. Now, a bad thing to do was switching the articles so that I forgot which window I was in. Now I'm back. Kadia and Benji's view. Let's see. With 222 votes, a still undecided race for Speaker, and some of his most headache-inducing members integral to his majority, McCarthy is likely to have little space to worry about political hygiene. That's an interesting way of putting it. In fact, Santos resigning might be a worst-case scenario, leaving an empty seat for months and a special election Democrats might be favored to win. I honestly don't know what to make of it. Brendan Buck, a former aide to Speakers John Boehner and Paul Ryan, said, "My expectation is they let him move forward while all this is investigated. It's hard to see ours being willing to give up that seat with such a tiny margin." Santos noticeably reiterated his support for McCarthy's speakership bid on Twitter just before the New York Times story came out, a reminder of his unusual potential importance as a freshman backbencher. McCarthy knows the value of a well-timed push. He urged Jeff Fortenberry to resign this year after he was convicted of lying to the FBI and previously kicked Steve King off his committees over the Iowa congressman's white nationalist rhetoric. Disciplining members for embarrassing the caucus or breaking with leadership is surely trickier now, Representative Don Bacon, Republican of Nebraska, told Semaphore. Democrats see an opportunity in McCarthy's more recent struggles to police his caucus. Dumping troubled members serves a purpose, after all. It helps minimize distractions and keep the high ground in fights with the other side. McCarthy booted King, for example, just as he was leading the caucus into a fight with Representative Ilhan Omar over her rhetoric about Israel that he said was anti-Semitic. You can't really have that happening when people can point and say, yeah, well, what about Steve King? So they shed Steve King, sort of. Facts First USA, the David Brock-led group formed to rebut the House's investigations, and I think they mean here the upcoming Republican House's investigations, released a strategy memo after the election urging Democrats to portray McCarthy as forced into a corrupt bargain with ultra-MAGA extremists to maintain his weak majority, and they're already eager to slot Santos into that frame. He doesn't even have the speakership locked in yet, and so they can't afford to throw anybody under the bus, unlike in prior situations, Brock told Semaphore on Tuesday. Now he needs every vote he can get. And one notable note included at the end here, the Democrat who lost to Santos, Robert Zimmerman, complained to Semaphore that the press dropped the ball on uncovering his past before the election, despite hints he wasn't all he seemed. So there you go. By the way, this is interesting. I guess before we give up at some point, eventually we have to give up on George Santos. But there's another George Santos thing here, also in Semaphore from Benji Sarlin, who just was a co-author of this piece. Surprise, George Santos might sort of be telling the truth about something. That is surprising. I did see a great toot on Mastodon earlier from, was it 10 Grain maybe, saying, shocker, surprise, a Republican congressman might be straight. I thought that was really good. Anyway, what's the surprise here? What could he possibly be almost kind of sort of telling the truth about? Congressman-elect George Santos, who was accused of faking just about every single aspect of his biography. They're using this in everything. I like that. That's great. You can see a lot of the journalistic practices that some of these writers advocated for in years past. They're actually implementing as editorial standards here. Things you have to reiterate in every story, even if the readers have heard it a million times, so that it's never missed, either with new readers or at worst, it's drummed into the heads of regular readers. So, Congressman-elect George Santos, who was accused of faking just about, and I think also quantitatively it's gotten worse and worse, major chunks of, most of, and now just about every single aspect of his biography, said on Twitter, Santos did, that he had a story to tell and would be clearing things up next week. Very Trumpian. 2 weeks, a very short period of time. We will no doubt be taking a break from our holiday celebrations to tune in after a series of revelations, beginning in the New York Times and continuing in the Forward and the Daily Beast. We've read all of those. That Santos may not, as he claimed, be a successful businessman, a college graduate, a grandchild of Holocaust survivors, or even married to his husband. Yes, that's right. We read that one too. By the way, I was having a good time with people talking about, so his family, he was lying about his family surviving the Holocaust. Oh, they survived the Holocaust, right? Everybody in Brazil survived the Holocaust. It was very easy. All you had to do was stay in Brazil. Not everybody survived. Yeah, people died in Brazil. That's true, but not from the Holocaust. They didn't. So all of Brazil survived the Holocaust. That's not a lie entirely. I hope that's not it. I'm sure there's something else, right, Benji? In the meantime, though, we did find, Benji means himself here, we did find at least some partial corroboration for a murky part of his life, his marriage. Okay, George Santos does have a husband, sources say, or at least a partner. So this second marriage, he acknowledges, and it seems to be true. I've known his husband for several years, and I have interacted with him on a few social occasions and at political events. Charles Moran, president of the Log Cabin Republicans, told Semaphore. Is this a guy you can trust? I don't know. That said, the current story is about George, not his spouse, so I don't really know why any of this is relevant. Yes, you do. The Daily Beast failed to find a marriage license for their union. Oh, I didn't realize that. Sparking a round of speculation about whether Santos, who the outlet had also reported had not disclosed a 2019 divorce to a woman, and really a divorce from a woman, had invented his current marriage, especially given a dearth of photos on social media or references to the wedding online. That would be rather unusual. Santos did not respond to a text message from Semaphore asking whether his marriage was officially registered in any state. A political researcher who looked into Santos referred Semaphore to social media accounts purportedly associated with his spouse, one of which shows him and Santos together in the Capitol and references their marriage. A profile in a Portuguese language outlet in 2020 identified his partner as a 24-year-old pharmacist born in Brazil and noted their wedding had been delayed by the pandemic. Santos brought up his husband on Twitter on Sunday in an exchange with Democratic Representative Ted Lieu of California over House Republican opposition to gay marriage. He previously claimed that his then-fiancée was threatened with termination from jobs twice during the pandemic, first for appearing maskless at Mar-a-Lago, then for refusing to obey a vaccine mandate due to allergies. Okay, Semaphore has not independently verified either claim, so watch out for that being a lie too. But I guess this whole thing, that's it. The whole thing basically comes down to, okay, he might actually be married to this guy now, but only maybe, because we haven't found any marriage certificates, which really in every other story would have been, treating it as a lie. There's no marriage certificate anywhere in any state. That's it. Somehow it's interesting. They credit him with this one, although maybe it was just a hook to get me to read the story. Okay. Well, it worked. And I think that might be it. Maybe for the George Santos stories, although who knows? While I'm reading here, somebody may text or toot a new one out, and I won't be able to help myself. All right, let me read this one because, I don't know, it's here, And that's easy. And also, it's one of the things that John Shiflett, who is our most vocal and most loyal listener on and KITM hashtag user on Mastodon, thank you very much, John, had suggested the other day. He's made a couple of suggestions, and this was one of them. Over at Lawfare, Quinta Jurecic, who writes on the dangerous omission in the January 6th committee reports summary, the January 6th committee's report summary. And I thought this made an appropriate addition, so why not roll it out here? The January 6th committee's work investigating the Capitol insurrection has been incredibly impressive. Investigators have uncovered new and damning information about Donald Trump's culpability in the violence of January 6th. They've reinvented the congressional hearing format, that's true, to tell a dramatic story and grip the attention of a distractible public, and they've shown just how capable a congressional committee can be when given the chance. So, when the committee released the 100-page executive summary of its forthcoming report, styled as introductory material to the final report of the Select Committee, I was ready to be astonished yet again by the quality of its work. And I was, but not in a good way. The summary systematically elides the egregious failures of law enforcement and intelligence agencies to predict and respond to the violence of January 6th. And I think that's a fair criticism. I mean, it does appear to elide that. I don't know if it's entirely fair to say that that should have been within the jurisdiction of the committee, or that some future committee, and I guess in this case in the Senate, might not be interested in having a look at that. It's something that really does need to be addressed. But I thought the focus on the insurrectionists was a perfectly valid and fine choice. But okay, let's read a little bit more, because it's worth listening to Quinta about this. More than that, it goes out of its way to present those agencies in a positive light despite their catastrophic neglect. It probably does. The committee has yet to publish its full report and the accompanying appendices, which will reportedly be released in the coming days. And this is one of those coming days, by the way. So I'm wary of drawing conclusions too quickly without having all the evidence in front of me. That said, the portrayal of law enforcement and intelligence officials in the summary is bizarre enough that it's worthy of immediate attention. So here it is. I mean, it's not immediate, but attention nonetheless. January 6th is a story about Trump and his supporters. But it is also a story about how the federal government dropped the ball on anticipating and preparing for violence. And we have been interested in that. I mean, it really has. It's not lost on me that the Homeland Security Department, the whole department, was formulated and premised on the idea that we're going to build a new entity to avoid the problem of having our law enforcement and intelligence officials miss warning signs because they either don't recognize them or they don't share information. We're going to build a whole new multi-billion-dollar department to ensure that this never happens again. And not only did it happen again anyway, it happened when there were plenty of clues, and the clues landed on the desks of analysts inside that very department who tried to implement the system that had been created for them and found that they couldn't. Now, it may turn out that they couldn't because there were essentially insider fraudsters in place in DHS whose business it was to prevent anyone from doing anything about insurrection fomented by Donald Trump and his supporters. But shouldn't we, with all that's at stake, be able to build a foolproof version of this? Maybe we can never get there. I don't know. But we should be trying, certainly. All right. So, again, that whole report is about Trump and his supporters, but it's also about how the government dropped the ball here. As NBC states in its reporting on the summary's odd framing, many experts and former officials have termed this, quote, the biggest intelligence failure since September 11th. And it probably is. The FBI produced only one document in the run-up to January 6th warning of potential violence, a bulletin not from FBI headquarters or from the desk of the director, who arguably was probably pro-insurrection, but from the Bureau's Norfolk, Virginia field office. FBI Director Chris Wray told Congress that he was not aware of that report in advance of January 6th. According to the Bureau's top counterterrorism official, the FBI was also not aware of online conversations about potential violence in the days before the insurrection. A bizarre statement, given that the plans for violence were plainly available to anyone with an internet connection. I mean, you all saw it, right? And the failures were not confined to the FBI. The Department of Homeland Security Office of Inspector General found that several divisions within the department's Office of Intelligence and Analysis identified the risk of violence in advance of January 6th, but that department failed to distribute the information widely, which is its whole purpose. The office did not issue any intelligence products about these threats until January 8th, which doesn't help anybody. The Inspector General wrote 2 days after the riot. Well, it doesn't help anybody prevent anything. It does help. Okay. Likewise, a June 2021 report from the Senate Rules Committee and the Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee describes in detail how officials at the Capitol Police found themselves utterly unprepared on January 6th. Again, some members of the Capitol Police identified the risk of violence ahead of time, but these assessments were not communicated widely either within the agency or outside of it. None of this is to take away from the actions of the Capitol Police, the D.C. Metropolitan Police Department, and other law enforcement officers at the Capitol during the insurrection. Many people engaged in acts of genuine heroism that day. The failures I'm describing here have to do with the government's failure to prepare in advance, many of which can be laid at the leadership of agencies like the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security, who failed to steer their employees toward focusing on the obvious threat in advance of the insurrection, which leads you either to conclude that they're terribly incompetent or are in on the insurrection. And maybe a couple of other options, but those are two big ones. The result was that the government was caught unawares on January 6th with catastrophic effects. But you wouldn't know it from reading the committee's executive summary. The strangeness begins on page 5, when the committee states, the intelligence community and law enforcement agencies did successfully detect the planning for potential violence on January 6th, including planning specifically by the Proud Boys and Oath Keeper militia groups who ultimately led the attack on the Capitol. As January 6th approached, the intelligence specifically identified the potential for violence at the U.S. Capitol. This intelligence was shared within the executive branch, including with the Secret Service and the President's National Security Council. And the emphasis that I gave it up there is, in fact, added by Quinta in this using italics. Now, without seeing the full report, it's difficult to fully evaluate what the committee is saying here. It may be referring to specific intelligence that was passed along. And as I've noted, it is true that a small number of officials did identify the risks of violence and shared the information to some extent. But given the broad failures to anticipate January 6th, it seems overly generous to describe the intelligence community and law enforcement agencies as successfully detecting the planning for potential violence, without noting anywhere that those agencies failed to disseminate or act on the information they did obtain. The committee is seemingly drawing a distinction between agencies detecting the possibility of violence, which they did to a limited extent, and agencies acting on that information. Yes, that's right. Where's my soundboard? Yes, what were you doing?
Acting!
That's right. Acting on the information, which they did not do. Some officials did notice that something might be wrong in advance of the insurrection. The committee quotes Donnell Harvin, who was serving as Chief of Homeland Security and Intelligence for the District of Columbia on January 6th, describing a number of red flags identified by his agency in advance of that day and his efforts to raise the alarm. But there were systematic failures in communicating that information between and within different branches of the federal government. And the FBI and Homeland Security leadership in particular sat on its hands. They sat on their hands anyway. And again, I'm waiting for the question to be asked, well, why did that happen? How did that actually come to be? Because the answer to that very well might be, that's the job they were hired to do by Donald Trump. Don't arrest or harass my people. They're getting ready to do an insurrection. All that is consistent with the committee's language. The phrasing here is relatively sunny but defensible. Later in its report, though, the committee moves from generous to contorted. The committee provides an extensive list of tips received by agencies, including the FBI, the Secret Service, and the Capitol Police, about potential violence in advance of January 6th. But nowhere does the committee state that the agencies in many cases failed to respond to those tips. We got them. We just didn't do anything with them. Thanks for the tip. Likewise, the committee notes the Norfolk report, but says nothing about the fact that the report received little attention and was the only intelligence product to come out of the FBI before the insurrection. A reader unfamiliar with the background might come away with the impression that the federal government was well aware of and prepared for the potential for violence in advance. The summary also makes bizarre contortions to let intelligence agencies off the hook. In a footnote, it suggests that the government simply might not have had the time to fully analyze the information it was receiving in the days before the insurrection. Given the timing of receipt of much of this intelligence immediately in advance of January 6th, it is unclear that any comprehensive intelligence community analytical product could have been reasonably expected, but it is clear that the information itself was communicated. A former FBI official described this to me as word salad. Why would the January 6th committee want to soft-pedal intelligence failures in this way? One clue is on page 48. After describing warnings raised by the District of Columbia's Homeland Security Office, this is D.C.'s Homeland Security Office, they're doing fine. The federal guys appear to be asleep. The report reads, again, this type of intelligence was shared, including obvious warnings about potential violence prior to January 6th. What was not shared and what was not fully understood by intelligence and law enforcement entities is what role President Trump would play on January 6th in exacerbating the violence and later refusing for multiple hours to instruct his supporters to stand down and leave the Capitol. Now, I can understand their focus on that one. And by the way, they could have, I think, fixed this problem by saying, but, President Trump, by extension, the unitary executive, meaning that it is essentially Donald Trump and what he says going in the Department of Homeland Security, the FBI, the National Guard, et cetera, et cetera. He has his tentacles everywhere, and he's, put these people in these positions with an eye toward ordering them not to do anything, not to get in the way of the insurrection, and probably does do that. We haven't established that, but it seems awfully likely that he would have said so or would have done so at some point. Anyway, but here they hinted at what we did not fully understand, the intelligence and law enforcement entities, was the role that Trump would play, both by himself and through his proxies, it should be said, at all the departments. No intelligence collection was apparently performed on President Trump's plan for January 6th, nor was there any analysis performed on what he might do to exacerbate potential violence. Certain Republican members of Congress who were working with Trump and the Giuliani team may have had insight on this particular risk, but none appear to have alerted the Capitol Police or any other law enforcement authority, again, because they were pro-insurrection. This analysis frames intelligence failures as essentially a matter of government officials' inability to predict Trump's violent and irresponsible actions. Okay. To put it another way, it suggests that Trump was the problem rather than systematic failures. And that's not really so wrong. The committee is correct to identify a genuine tension here between Trump's role as chief executive and the responsibility of law enforcement and intelligence agencies to protect the country against security threats that the president himself was helping to create. Yeah, that's the real problem, I think. The summary argues that the central cause of January 6th was one man, former President Donald Trump, who many others followed. But Trump was not the only reason that January 6th happened the way it did. He caused the insurrection, but intelligence and law enforcement agencies failed to prevent it. And framing the issue this way frees the FBI, the Department of Homeland Security, the Capitol Police, and others from taking responsibility for those failures. Recent reporting by the Washington Post and NBC has described tensions within the January 6th committee over whether to focus the final report narrowly on the actions of Trump specifically, or whether to incorporate the broader range of issues around the insurrection. Both outlets reported that staffers investigating law enforcement failures, the blue team, in the color-coded parlance of the committee's work, were frustrated by the possibility that their work would be set aside due to the insistence of Liz Cheney that the committee narrow its focus to Trump. I've been unsure what to make of this reporting. After all, the committee is working on an extremely tight schedule, and it's easy to see how that could lead to good faith disagreements about what aspects of the sprawling investigation to focus on and how. I was ready for a report from the committee that perhaps downplayed the role of law enforcement in what happened on January 6th to put the spotlight on Trump individually. I did not expect that the committee would distort the facts to flatter law enforcement in this way. Such distortions are especially disappointing because the January 6th committee has otherwise produced a powerful and important body of work. These aren't minor quibbles. If Americans don't get an accounting of how law enforcement and intelligence agencies failed on January 6th, how can we hope to fix our flaws that led to those failures in the first place and ensure that something like the insurrection doesn't happen again? Hopefully, the full committee report will somehow mitigate the summary's serious flaws. I'll be reading it closely. Okay, we'll wait for you to do that. And the only thing I can say is, all that really that you could have done, and it is awfully difficult to see how you would have prepared the federal actors in the law enforcement and intelligence community for this, but to say, you have to keep an eye out for the possibility that your terrorist target here is the President of the United States and the people he orders around in the executive branch, and plus the ones he orders around outside of the federal government, or any government indeed. And that's awfully difficult to get people to believe and swallow without having seen it happen once. But of course, now you've seen it happen once. So you know that it can happen, but you know how this will go. First of all, Republicans will scream and cry like they did the first time when we said, domestic terrorists might actually be more danger to us than international terrorists. And quite frankly, domestic terrorists are overwhelmingly right wing. And they were like, oh, bias, FBI, you can't say that. And they, howled and screamed and made them retract it, but it was actually true. Now they'll be saying, well, you can't do this about telling the Homeland Security and intelligence and law enforcement apparatus to keep one eye on the president, although they might then find, oh, you know what? Actually, it's a great idea. While Joe Biden is president, we should be using the FBI to investigate all the violence that's almost certain, I'm sure they would say, to come from the Hunter Biden laptop situation, even though no one can explain how that would lead to any violence. But then that will go away next Republican president, and they won't be doing it. But they might be using it against Democrats who are considering running against that Republican president. We'll see. Okay, good piece. Glad I included it. And now that I think about it, that prompted something else. I said, oh, that reminds me that there's something else here in pocket that ought to be the follow-up to this. And now I don't know if I can remember what it is. Oh, yes, here it is. Right from Daily Kos itself, Brandy Buckman had done a piece, January 6th committee transcript. First batch includes Fifth Amendment findings. And I'm wondering, is this the full report that she was sorting through here, or are we still in the introduction? I think they may have produced some of those transcripts of interviews, and Brandy was looking at the highlights there, and I thought that might be a good way to enter into the weekend, because I have a feeling we're going to be talking about some of the specifics when we get back here on Boxing Day on Monday. And she says it this way. In its first release of records from its extensive investigation, the January 6th committee published transcripts from 34 witnesses who testified before the probe, including key figures close to former President Donald Trump who invoked their Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. Though the witnesses, who include the likes of Roger Stone, boo, Jeffrey Clark, yuck, Michael Flynn, spy, Elmer Stewart Rhodes, convict, Enrique Tarrio, I'm going to stop coming up with nicknames at this point. I'm bored already. John Eastman and others, that was only two anyway, did not offer their testimony freely. The transcripts nonetheless offer greater clarity into the breadth and depth of the committee's investigation and just how much information investigators managed to amass around some of the probe's most contentious targets. The Select Committee is expected to release its final report, a massive tome reportedly exceeding 800 pages, on Thursday, which is now yesterday, and I don't know whether they did it or delayed it due to weather or what. We'll see if we can figure that out before I give up the mic today, tomorrow, whatever day it is now. Well, anyway, they were supposed to do it on Thursday after delaying the release on Wednesday, so I guess they must have done it. Additional transcripts will be forthcoming too. The transcripts released on Wednesday night are listed and linked below for everybody to look through. That's nice. This batch features interviews with Republican National Committee state chapter leaders, Trump attorneys, fundraisers, and organizers at the rally at the Ellipse, members of extremist groups, and those involved with the fake elector gambit. We got Christopher Barsanas, a Republican committee chair and a Proud Boy, Kathy Burden, National Committee chairwoman and Michigan GOP member there, Alexander Brusiewicz, the Stop the Steal leader and right-wing activist, Patrick Casey, the leader of America First movement, Dion Cini, C-I-N-I, an organizer of Trump Boat Parade. I didn't realize that they were caught up in this. Jeffrey Clark, of course, comes in two parts here. Jim, DeGraffenreid, Nevada GOP member and fake elector scheme. Enrique De La Torre, Stop the Steal supporter, alleged ties to the Proud Boys, and Roger Stone, two Enriques tied to the Proud Boys. John Eastman, Jenna Ellis, remember the Trump attorney and fake elector scheme lady. Kimberly Fletcher, president of and founder of Moms for America and Stop the Steal. Michael Flynn, the notorious international spy. Nick Fuentes, the white nationalist. Julie Fancelli, the Publix heiress, the Publix supermarkets heiress, who funded the rally at the Ellipse. Gosh, there's a lot, and I think I'm going to stop at this point, but there's name after name after name. Charlie Kirk is in there. I'll see what else jumps out. Alex Jones, anybody else like big name that we've mentioned before? Stuart Rhodes is in there. Roger Stone, Enrique Tarrio, Kelly Ward, the Arizona GOP chairwoman. I think that's it. And other names less familiar to us. So the highlights, as Brandy sees them, from John Eastman's testimony. Before adopting its final report, the committee voted unanimously to issue criminal referrals to the Justice Department for former President Donald Trump and Attorney John Eastman. Eastman, who authorized the 6-point strategy aimed at overturning the results of the 2020 election, invoked his Fifth Amendment right more than 150 times when he met with investigators. He has been largely on the losing side of a protracted legal battle with the committee over his records and unsuccessfully attempted to shield hundreds of documents that he argued were exclusively protected under attorney-client privilege. Eastman is not only under investigation by the Justice Department, but is also being scrutinized by prosecutors in Fulton County, Georgia, reviewing Trump's efforts to submit fake electors there, too. Select Committee counsel posed several questions to Eastman about legal memos he wrote regarding so-called alternate electors and the role he argued former Vice President Mike Pence could play to halt the joint session of Congress on January 6th. Though Eastman appeared on podcasts in May and September of 2021, where he openly discussed these matters and others, including his direct conversations with Trump in the run-up to January 6th, the attorney nonetheless invoked his Fifth Amendment right once in the committee's hot seat. He also refused to answer questions about his participation with the Federalist Society, as well as his interactions with Trump campaign figures like Corey Lewandowski or other allies elsewhere like Jeffrey Clark, the former Justice Department attorney. He also would not provide the committee with any insights when they asked about his contact with state legislatures in Arizona or his contacts with Senators Josh Hawley, Ted Cruz, or Mike Lee about efforts to overturn the election. Lee told the National Review this April that Eastman sent him a memo on January 2nd featuring strategies to overturn the election. Next up, is Roger Stone, appearing before the committee for just under an hour. Stone's testimony before the probe was terse. He invoked his Fifth Amendment right for questions both simple and complex. He would not answer queries from committee counsel about his age or where he lived. He would not answer questions about whether he believed the violence on January 6th was justified. And he would not answer questions about his contact with the former president, including whether they spoke on the eve of the insurrection or on the day of it. He invoked his right against self-incrimination when asked about his trip to Trump's Mar-a-Lago property on December 27th, 2021. When asked about the fundraising he is alleged to have done for the Stop the Steal movement, he is also declined to answer. And by the way, his trip to Mar-a-Lago property, was that on December 27th, 2021, or was that on 2020? Like in advance of the insurrection? I'm not sure. But he may also have gone in December of 21, and whatever. I guess they wanted to know about that. When shown video clips of himself urging people to, quote, help us pay for the staging, the transportation, and most importantly, the security of our peaceful protesters, Stone also invoked the Fifth. Any questions about his participation or presence in group chats among Proud Boys and Oath Keepers were also rebuffed. Oath Keeper Joshua James of Alabama, who already pleaded guilty to seditious conspiracy, was one of several Oath Keepers who served as security for Stone on January 5th and 6th. We've seen those pictures. Committee member Jamie Raskin asked during the interview, I'd like to ask Mr. Stone whether you believe that coups are allowed in our constitutional system. I most definitely decline to respond to your question based on my Fifth Amendment constitutional protections with all due respect, Stone said. Next up, Jeffrey Clark. Former President Donald Trump nearly installed Clark as Attorney General in his bid to overturn the results of the 2020 election. Records have shown Clark was sympathetic to the president's views about the election being rigged or stolen. Witnesses who did not invoke their Fifth Amendment right before the committee, like former Acting Attorney General Jeffrey Rosen and his deputy Richard Donahue, testified that Clark tried to pass off a memo proclaiming election fraud in battleground states with Trump's blessing. Clark was nearly installed at Trump's behest, but a threat of mass resignations at the Justice Department with just days to go until the certifications kept Trump at bay. The committee transcript reveals that Clark met with the committee twice. On his first visit in November of 2021, he arrived with a list of objections, most focused on privilege issues. He and his attorney bailed from the first meeting with the committee during a break in the interview, despite being told to remain in place. I didn't realize that. The second interview in February of 2022 was no more fruitful than the first. This time, Clark invoked his Fifth Amendment right over 100 times. Then Mike Flynn. When the committee put on its public hearings this summer, the partial clips shown from an interview with disgraced Trump White House National Security Advisor Michael Flynn were stark. Flynn, a retired lieutenant general, without pause, invoked his Fifth Amendment right repeatedly when asked if he felt the violence of January 6th was justified. The committee sought Flynn out because of his integral role in efforts to reverse the results of the 2020 election and his proximity to Trump, as well as other White House officials and architects of the fake elector scheme, like Trump's personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani. Investigators asked Flynn numerous questions to no avail about who he may have contacted in or outside of the government in the run-up to January 6th about the overturn efforts. He did not answer questions about a reportedly unhinged December 18th meeting in the Oval Office where he, Attorney Sidney Powell, Giuliani, and Trump discussed the seizure of voting machines. Trump would issue his "will be wild" tweet urging supporters to descend on Washington, D.C. the next day. He was mostly mum when investigators prodded him about why he thought Trump may have pardoned him in November 2020. Flynn was pardoned for lying to the FBI about his contact with Russian officials. I think Trump saw my whole case as a travesty, he said during his deposition. Flynn would not answer questions about work he did with Powell or Giuliani, nor would he answer simple questions about who they were. He invoked his Fifth Amendment Fifth Amendment rights anyway, when asked about social media posts promoting the Stop the Steal movement, and he would not answer questions about how he or others were or were not compensated for their work for Trump on the 2020 election. No answers were provided about his interactions with Patrick Byrne, the Trump-supporting founder of Overstock.com, who peddled election fraud conspiracy theories and took several meetings with Trump allies and attorneys. Well, let's see. Who else is in here? Enrique Tarrio. Oh, okay. Is the last named person, and then some other insights. So let's keep going. The leader of the Proud Boys, Enrique Tarrio, who goes on trial in July for seditious conspiracy, sat with the committee for a lengthy deposition, and though he invoked the Fifth, he was still rather chatty and responded to several questions about his perception of the Proud Boys' ideology. The group bills itself, of course, as a Western chauvinist group. He also spoke some about his relationship with the Oath Keepers, another extremist group that descended on the Capitol on January 6th. Tarrio said he didn't like Stuart Rhodes, actually, the founder of the Oath Keepers, citing beefs the group had when they both showed up in Oregon in 2020 to purportedly stave off Antifa in the area. Tarrio said Oath Keepers had meant to provide buses for those at the event, including Proud Boys, but abandoned the plan abruptly. The night before the attack, Tarrio and Rhodes met in an underground parking garage. Tarrio described shaking hands with Rhodes begrudgingly. He also played down interactions the Proud Boys had with Oath Keepers, like the recently convicted Kelly Meggs. Meggs was convicted of seditious conspiracy along with other charges at the trial last month. Prosecutors showed jurors texts where Meggs spoke of a burgeoning bond between the groups. Tarrio told the committee that this was just Meggs showing off and name-dropping. Tarrio's attorney called any alliance between the groups fantasy. The committee transcripts show Tarrio's former attorney, J. Daniel Hull, taking every moment possible to criticize the panel's purpose as they asked even the simplest of questions. Hull often interjected as Tarrio spoke, especially at the start of the interview, when the committee tried to sort out the Proud Boys organization structure and membership. I think a couple of years ago, you estimated to the press that there were about 22,000 members of the Proud Boys. Does that sound right? The committee counsel said. Tarrio replied, I've said throughout the years, I've said numerous numbers that I would assume based on just like how many Republicans there are in the state or how many Democrats there are in the state and things like that, and people that I've talked to and that self-identify as Proud Boys. That's a crap answer. Hull cut in. Forgive me, what was the number you just gave? Was it 22,000? Committee counsel affirmed that was the number Tarrio gave. No, you don't know, Hull said. I don't know, Tarrio said. Jury selection has already begun in the Proud Boys seditious conspiracy case. Opening statements begin on January 3rd, 2023. Okay. And lastly, another section called New Insights. So let's see what is parked here. Other witnesses in the first batch of transcripts provided fresh insights into January 6th despite invoking their Fifth Amendment rights. As a senior advisor to Trump's re-election campaign, Mike Roman fielded questions. Investigators brought up a January 5th email between himself and Trump lawyer Alex Cannon discussing a report shared with them by an RNC employee in Atlanta. Reviewing voter roll figures in the exchange, Roman remarked, "Only Atlanta overproduced in raw votes. The margin was higher in 3 of 4. Not sure that satisfies the narrative." The narrative, this message would indicate, was the voter, quote, fraud alleged by the Trump campaign. As other reports in his other points, in the exchange, at other points in the exchange, Roman denied knowing who Cannon was. That's some exchange they're having there. And invoked his Fifth. He invoked it again. Oh, I see. The exchange with the committee. When questions arose about whether Giuliani had appointed him the lead on alternate electors slates for Pennsylvania, he refused to answer questions about what role, if any, legislators like Senator Ron Johnson may have had in advancing phony electors for Trump. Notably, during the questioning, committee counsel revealed that pro-Trump electors in Pennsylvania had some concerns about passing off their slates as authentic. Trump lawyer Kenneth Cheeseborough told Roman that the bunk electors were worried about their legal exposure. Also notable were insights that shook out in interviews with Alexander Brusiewicz, a leader in the Stop the Steal movement. As committee investigators asked Brusiewicz about communications it unearthed tied to the movement, they revealed that Representative Paul Gosar of Arizona sent a group message to a Stop the Steal DM chat at 5:15 p.m. while he was locked down in the Capitol during the siege. "We're still on lockdown in congressional offices," Gosar wrote. Brusiewicz would not answer whether he was in contact with Gosar throughout the January 6th events or why they were in touch. He also refused to answer questions about any of his contacts with Women for America First and their planning of pro-Trump rallies in Georgia and Washington, D.C. Other committee transcripts revealed that Julie Fancelli, I was hoping we would get to this one, and I hope we see what I had seen elsewhere about her. This is the heiress to the Publix supermarket chain. She funneled huge sums of money to support the Stop the Steal rally at the Ellipse and other pro-Trump events on January 6th. Fancelli shelled out nearly $3 million for January 6th. She gave Charlie Kirk just over $1 million. Some $250,000 went to Kirk's Turning Point USA, and $750,000 went to Turning Point's Political Action Committee, Turning Point PAC. Fancelli gushed over Kirk, calling him her hero, and she fawned over Roger Stone and Alex Jones, too. She ended up funneling $200,000 to Jones and agreed to fly Stone to Washington on a private jet. Fancelli's investment in the rallies in January 6th had been previously reported, but the details were limited. It was reported last year that she had sent about $650,000 to entities behind the Stop the Steal movement, but the $3 million price tag is news and offers a glimpse into just how much the millionaire was willing to cough up for Trump. All right, what I'm not seeing there is what I saw on Mastodon earlier about her, and although I think it probably was content that had originally appeared on Twitter, so I wonder if I might be able to find it there. But apparently, during her questioning, not only did she invoke the Fifth Amendment, but I don't know, I guess at some point she must have gotten in her head that there was more, or maybe just she thought that the more citations she made to the Constitution, the smarter she sounded. But apparently that wouldn't, that doesn't always work. Where is it? Is this one it? Yeah, here we go. A tweet from Gary White, who is a reporter at The Ledger. What Ledger? I don't know. But back at home, that's in New Jersey. The Ledger is the Star Ledger of Newark, but I think he's Florida-based, so it's probably something else. And reporting on the Publix supermarket heiress makes more sense that it be down south in Florida. Anyway, House January 6th Committee releases transcript of interview with Julie Fancelli, part-time Lakeland resident and Publix heiress. She repeatedly invoked the First, Fourth, Fifth, and 15th Amendments somehow in declining to answer questions about her role in helping to finance the January 6th rally. Okay, and he got that wrong. She was invoking the 14th Amendment, not the 15th Amendment, but to what end, I don't know. But here's how it kind of goes. The question here is, what did you understand to be the purpose of the event on January 6th? And her answer is, I decline to answer pursuant to the rights afforded to me under the Constitution, including the First, Fourth, Fifth, and 14th Amendments. The follow-up question should have been, what the hell are you talking about? But the next question was, in fact, how do you know a woman called Caroline Wren? I decline to answer pursuant to the rights afforded to me under the Constitution, including the First, Fourth, Fifth, and 14th Amendments. Now, Ms. Wren assisted your efforts to providing funding for an event on January 6th at the White House Ellipse, correct? I decline to answer pursuant to the rights. You get the idea. Now, gosh, I mean, the First Amendment, why? The Fourth Amendment, search and seizure. Fifth Amendment, I understand. Of course, 14th Amendment, I don't really know why she was invoking that. But what can I tell you? Odd and fun, I suppose, to note that went on. And it's kind of wacky and goofy. And I'll put it away in pocket for you and provide that to Scott, and you can make what you will of it. All right. That may be it for this train of thought. We'll see what station we arrive at next. Okay, well, how about we wrap up then with a shift in gears to a completely different story, something I've been holding on to for a little while that I think needs to be put on record. You know how we use our Fridays here. A Washington Post piece from December 17th by Tim Craig entitled Water Slides and Rifles Inside Florida's Playground for the Far Right. I don't think I've heard anything about this, besides that Florida in its entirety is a playground for the far right. This datelined Venice, California. In the woods off a southwest Florida highway, a Republican business executive has built an entertainment complex to bring together like-minded conservatives for everything from speeches by far-right leaders, wee-hoo, hooray, to family barbecues. Well, okay, at least there's barbecue. A concrete entryway leads visitors through a black-painted hallway filled with quotes from founding fathers, such as Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin. Those would be them. A reception hall is lined with a wall-sized copy of the Bill of Rights. A shooting range, of course, adjoins the facility, and a large sign reminds visitors of their Second Amendment rights, which you would have just seen there in that wall-sized copy of the Bill of Rights. There are also inflatable water slides, a gazebo, and picnic benches for kids. Initially, Victor G. Mellor, M-E-L-L-O-R, the owner of a construction business, wasn't sure anyone would show up. He'd invested his savings in creating a meeting spot for Republican partisans. Also, homeschool moms and others who shared his views on Donald Trump, gun rights, and thorny topics like vaccine and mask mandates, convinced he could have a role in steering the nation further to the right. See, all he needed was picnic benches, you see? Anyway, but as the pandemic persisted, turnout grew. Longtime residents and new arrivals from other states began flocking to the site. So did far-right leaders. Trump's controversial first national security advisor, the notorious international spy Michael Flynn, became a frequent guest. Grassroots organizations vying to unseat Republican Party members considered too moderate declared the complex, dubbed the Hollow, as their home base. They have infiltrated our school systems and worked their way up, Mellor said, referring actually to Democratic politicians that he labeled socialists and explaining why he felt he needed to build the facility. And now we have to start on all levels, taking it back. I'm not really certain how that connects, but okay. As the Sunshine State shifts right, a trend evident in the November 8th elections in which Governor Ron DeSantis won the state by nearly 20 points, researchers say more radical members of the Republican Party have grown emboldened. The Anti-Defamation League has recorded a significant increase in extremist-related incidents in Florida over the past year. At Mellor's complex, the state's most conservative residents have built a community geared around buttressing each other's views. In other words, a safe space for snowflakes, but whatever. As Mellor and Flynn align to try to push the Florida GOP even further to the right, other Southwest Florida residents are worried. They accuse the pair of being agitators who use the Hollow to fuel a toxic style of politics under the guise of festive summer cookouts and holiday gatherings. This idea of forming this all-encompassing family-oriented venue is rather brilliant on their part, said Carol Lerner, a retired education analyst and researcher who produced a 30-page report that found elements of the far right were increasingly drawn to the 27-acre campus, but that makes it super dangerous, too. Located in the middle of the west coast of Florida, Sarasota County includes wealthy enclaves along the Emerald Waters. I wish it was among the Emerald Waters, but it's along the Emerald Waters of the Gulf of Mexico, suburban housing developments, and rural communities wedged among swamps and pine forests. It's here where Mellor says he chose to lay down roots in 1994 after 4 years in the Marine Corps. He quickly found work in construction and 3 years later started his own concrete business, testing his luck in the boom-bust South Florida prefabricated concrete market, he said. After filing for bankruptcy in 2010, that's the test, the results of the test there, Mellor formed a new company, American Precast. As that company became successful, for him anyway, Mellor said he started slowly paying closer attention to politics. Initially, the father of three said his interest in politics was limited to his concerns that President Barack Obama would restrict firearms sales, because he totally did that. He voted for Trump in 2016, drawn to the celebrity entrepreneur's boisterous personality and stance on gun rights. Over time, he felt like the president wasn't getting fair treatment by the media. I said, "This isn't right, and it's why I kind of jumped in," Mellor said. Okay. After Trump was defeated in 2020, Mellor traveled to Washington and joined Trump supporters in marching to the U.S. Capitol in protest. He was an insurrectionist. Just knocked on front doors, Mellor, pictured in the Capitol grounds, said in a Facebook post on January 6th, 2021, to give you an idea of what he was doing that day. Mellor said he never entered the Capitol as the insurrection unfolded, and he was never charged with any wrongdoing, but he sympathizes with many of the demonstrators who now face criminal charges, referring to the pro-Trump mob that assaulted officers, trapped lawmakers, and vandalized the home of Congress as political prisoners. It wasn't long after that Mellor said he woke up one morning with the idea of turning an event space he had built into a campground for kids based on the Constitution. Okay. He told his kids they shouldn't expect an inheritance. I'm spending it on the Constitution, kids. Instead, he was going to spend $3 million developing a complex on a property he'd acquired 2 years earlier in Venice, a city on Florida's Gulf Coast. He broke ground on new sections of the property using an excavator from his business. He dug a man-made lake and moats, brought in toys for kids, and placed a large white cross near 2 benches. That'll do it. Convert those benches. And he poured concrete to build pathways and bridges, wanting to use material that would withstand the test of time. He officially christened it the Hollow, a reference to the type of precast concrete his business produces and the trees surrounding the complex, many of which are hollow. Then he waited for people to come. If you hollow it out, they will come, I guess. Sarasota County has been a Republican stronghold for generations. The moderate, business-friendly wing of the GOP, traditionally prevailing in local political contests. Recently, however, the county's politics have lurched further to the right. Conservatives now hold a 4-1 majority on the county school board after pro-DeSantis candidates touting parental rights dominated a contentious local race. 3 conservative candidates skeptical of coronavirus vaccines were recently elected to oversee Sarasota Memorial Hospital, alarming doctors, hospital administrators, and medical experts. Flynn, who was pardoned by Trump after he pleaded guilty of lying to the FBI about his conversations with the Russian ambassador to the United States, moved 2 years ago to Sarasota, where he has become a significant force in local politics. He and several of his friends and family members gained seats this summer on the 272-member Sarasota County Republican Party Executive Committee. Basically, if you walk in, you get those seats. Earlier this month, Flynn promoted a conservative challenger who was trying to unseat the incumbent county party chairman, but the Flynn-backed candidate was narrowly defeated. Mellor, when there's an actual vote, they lose. When it's just show up and we'll put you on the committee, they win. They win a seat. Wow. Mellor was also key in supporting the local Sarasota GOP victories. He and his companies gave more than $30,000 to a local political action committee that supported conservative school board and hospital board candidates, according to campaign finance records. Mellor said he also hosted conservative leaders at the Hollow so they could campaign and fundraise. Grassroots groups like Sarasota Watchdogs, an organization that is pushing to expel moderate Republicans from the local party, consider the Hollow to be a gathering spot for Bayraktars, I would say. According to interviews with conservative activists and meeting notices, Mellor also helped start a local chapter of Moms for America, because he's a mom, a conservative group that urges women to shift the nation's, quote, culture, and that's a good way of putting it, to the right. The group's name is now affixed to a large sign at the entrance to the Hollow. Well, that just about changes everything. Flynn has visited or spoken the Hollow more than 50 times, according to Mellor, and the retired Army general frequently touts the complex as he travels around the country to promote his view that the nation's evangelical Christian way of life is under threat. It's a terrific location. Very patriotic. A patriotic location. Okay. Owned and designed and dreamed up by a former Marine, which makes it automatically good, apparently. Flynn told an audience over the summer he's a terrific friend. Flynn declined requests for comment, including written questions that were submitted through Mellor, who now acts as an informal spokesman for Flynn. How do you like that? Over the past 2 years, Mellor and Flynn have stepped up their activities at the Hollow. There are Patriot Appreciation Day cookouts, biblical citizenship courses, and, of course, youth firearm safety classes. The Hollow has become officially known as the Hollow 2A in reference to the Second Amendment, which is, of course, hollow because there's more guns than people in this country, as you know. So we'll be looking for headlines, stories datelined Venice, Florida, or Sarasota County, Florida, for gun fail in the near future. I'm sure that's been happening all along, but now there'll be more kids, I guess, involved. Members of the Proud Boys, the far-right chauvinistic group with a history of violence whose members include several people charged with storming the Capitol on January 6th, have been photographed at the Hollow wearing their organization's black and yellow T-shirts. The photos were uploaded onto the Hollow's social media pages, which helped Lerner produce her report last spring. Melissa Radovich, 41, a leader of Sarasota Watchdogs who is married to a member of the Proud Boys, said the Hollow provides an array of conservative groups a venue to gather and strategize. It should be the churches and it used to be bars and taverns, but it's such a beautiful place, and right now you need a place for the community to meet, Radovich said, and people are getting involved in politics who normally don't get involved in politics. Okay. In Sarasota County, the Proud Boys have been linked to acts of intimidation, which is not really politics, at demonstrations in support of abortion rights, school board meetings, and gay rights gatherings. On the night of the primary election, a member of the group was also photographed holding his index finger, to his thumb. You know what that is? It's the okay thing, a gesture associated with the white supremacy movement. James Hole, a leader of the Proud Boys in Sarasota County, declined to discuss his group's activities when reached by the Washington Post. In September, the Anti-Defamation League published a report that found Florida has become a nest of widespread disinformation and conspiracy theories. Although Ben Popp, an investigator researcher, that's what it says, at the ADL's Center on Extremism, said some Proud Boys chapters in Florida are not as violent as others nationally. They're mostly pretty lazy. He said the group's members still act as conduits for extremist rhetoric that they pass on to others. It is pretty clear that there are ideological bridges being developed between more mainstream individuals and some pretty hardcore extremists, he said. Rather than innocuous gatherings, some see the Hollow's activities as a concerning signal of how far-right ideology is becoming infused in local political debates. The Sarasota chapter of Moms for America has held meetings and movie nights at the Hollow. They should ban all their movies, too. And an array of speakers affiliated with the Christian right have spoken there under banners that read, "Local action has national impact." I think they are out to create a force to take over the country, Lerner, the researcher, who identifies as a Democrat, said of Flynn and Mellor, and they are doing it locally. Mellor scoffs at the suggestion he or the people who socialize at the Hollow are dangerous. He said, the Proud Boys have never held a formal meeting at the Hollow, though he did let them set up a booth once to raise money for a Christmas toy drive. He acknowledged that Proud Boy members also have volunteered at the site. Of course, same could be said of local mafia figures in New York. They give out Christmas toys and such all the time, but are no less dangerous for having done so, I would note. I have never had a Proud Boy meeting here, but I should, said Mellor, who believes members of the group are no different from other fathers who visit the Hollow. Just, they're probably not, as long as they're convicts with violent criminal records. Anyway, when residents sign up to volunteer at the Hollow, they are asked to confirm that they are comfortable around firearms. A sign with text against a backdrop of a Revolutionary War-era American flag notes the right to bear arms and states, that guaranteed any attempt of violence toward our children, or anybody else for that matter, will be met with overwhelming deadly force. What a manly statement that is. There is a gun range next to the Hollow, and though Meller said he does not operate it, some of those who visit his complex also go to the adjacent facility for firearms training. In the coming months, Meller plans to double the size of the Hollow, adding a community garden, a butterfly farm, and a planetarium. The entrepreneur turned activist is even considering creating a manatee rehabilitation facility on the property. They're going to need science for all this stuff, so I hope they're into that. This is a place for families, Meller said. They build friendships, and the kids get to run around and play, and sometimes catch a stray bullet, and just be kids. The Post gained access to the Hollow in early August after being invited by Meller onto the property. Meller, who is deeply distrustful of the media, had a video crew document most of his interactions with the Post reporter and photographer. At a gathering at the property, burgers simmered on the grill, kids splashed around in a spray fountain, others entered an inflated dome where they got a lesson about the stars. Meller does not charge a fee to access the Hollow, even though he estimates he now spends $1 million annually on its upkeep. Amber Earhart, or Arhart, I'm not sure, A-R-E-H-A-R-T, 33, visited the property with her 4 children, all of whom are homeschooled. And so therefore, almost by definition, none any smarter than Mom. But let's see, maybe she's a genius. We don't trust the system, and that's and what they are teaching. And I don't trust people with my children, she said, even though she lives in Florida where everybody won on parents' rights and they just listen to the parents all the time there. But you can never tell with these DeSantis types. I agree. Keep your kids at home. Now, anyway, that explains her decision not to send her kids to public school, or any school for that matter, and her interest in meeting others at the Hollow. The world seems a little crazy to me. I think it's a little crazy too, but I usually think it's people like you. But anyway, it seems a little crazy to her too, so we have that in common. And this is such a great community. I feel it's hard to find a great community. Okay. That's just like your opinion, man. When Hurricane Ian battered southwest Florida in late September, it left parts of the Hollow submerged in 4 feet of floodwater. I thought I had heard about Venice, Florida being particularly hard hit by storms and water surge and everything because of the way it's been built. I think we read an article about that once. Anyway, so I guess it's subsided now. The water rose around the Hollow's White Cross and submerged Meller's pricey construction equipment. Oh no. Meller and Flynn took a boat through the floodwaters to retrieve the U.S. flags. That's super important. Meller hopes to have the facility fully reopened in January, and he has been fielding requests to replicate the facility in other states. The Hollow, Meller said, is built to last. I do concrete. Concrete is everywhere, he said, and it will be here forever. Which, maybe is more or less true, although I'm pretty sure I just saw something on the various news wires about how destructive concrete is, in fact, to the environment, not just where it is, but globally because of the way it plays with heat and heat retention, et cetera, et cetera. So, of course, it would be the favorite construction equipment or construction medium of somebody like this. And very interesting request that they ask he replicated in other states. The guy just said he's spending all of his children's inheritance money on it, and he spends $1 million of his own personal money to maintain the place annually. And all of these makers, not takers, are very interested in him just replicating other places for them to play for free and hang out and have fun and have a good time while he burns his $1 million annually. So, all right. Well, you know how it is with these people. They're all socialists, and this kind of proves it. All right. Why don't we say that wraps things up for today, because I think we're getting right about to the end of the time we ordinarily allow for ourselves. Let's see if there's any short items I can squeeze in or read over the exit music just to lull you to sleep as we pass off the microphone to Justice Putnam for the Friday show. All right, maybe we'll use this to squeeze in one more story and then use as the outro and the bed for the outro music. Something I've been holding on to for a little longer, December 16th, the day before the last piece here, from the Des Moines Register. Just another crazy gun story and Good old story about how the cops are helping locally. Iowa police chief charged with lying to ATF to obtain machine guns for resale. How do you like that? William Morris, the famous Hollywood agent, I guess, and Noel Alves Grancy team up for the Des Moines Register as the authors of this piece. Obviously another William Morris. A small Iowa town of 800 residents likely has no need for a police force armed with 90 machine guns to keep the peace. Yeah, probably not. What is that mathematically? 90 machine guns per 800 residents. Okay. Anyway, that at least is the view of federal prosecutors, those notoriously nosy folk who on Wednesday, about 2 weeks ago, a week ago, I guess now, on Wednesday announced the indictments of Adair. Is that the name of the city? The town? Adair. Adair Chief of Police Bradley Wendt on charges of making false statements to the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms and Explosives, to obtain numerous machine guns over a 4-year period on behalf of the Adair Police Department. And it wasn't even really for them in the end, which during Wendt's tenure has never had more than 3 officers. So 90 machine guns, that's 30 machine guns per officer. That math we can do in our head. Wow. Well, that wasn't for them, obviously. Instead, according to prosecutors, weapons would be resold for profit through Wendt's private gun store or another store owned by a friend who is also facing charges. According to court filings and the press release from the U.S. Attorney's Office, Wendt used his position as chief of police to obtain 10 machine guns for the official use of the department, even though they only had 3 officers, but later resold at least 6 of those weapons for, quote, significant profit. In addition, Wendt obtained 13 guns for his Denison and Anita-based gun store, BW Outfitters, under the pretense that they were to be used as demonstration models for future potential purchases by the department. A further 10 weapons were obtained in the same manner for Williams Contracting, a federally licensed firearms dealer business owned by Wendt's friend Robert Williams, who is also facing charges. Prosecutors say Wendt sought to purchase or demonstrate approximately 90 machine guns between July 2018 and August 2022. Some of the weapons were used for public machine gun shoots where Wendt and Williams charged customers money to be able to fire the weapons. The indictment describes the firearms as fully automatic weapons not legally available to the public, including an M60 machine gun, a belt-fed weapon widely used by the U.S. military since the Vietnam War that was purportedly obtained for official use by the Adair Police Department. Who in the world would they be using that against? Wendt instead had the M60 mounted on his personally owned armored Humvee. Exactly what you need. Great. What a well-run town. Let's see. That's a pull quote. We'll just go right on with the rest of the story here. Wendt also repeatedly sought to obtain for the department a rotary M134 minigun capable of firing 50 rounds per second, usually mounted on military helicopters. Well, the ATF denied that requested transfer. The Adair Police Department does not own a helicopter. The indictment notes at least some of the weapons purportedly obtained for the police department were bought with Wendt's personal funds, and it's not clear if city money was involved in the purchases. Wendt is charged with 18 counts of making false statements to the ATF and 1 for unlawfully possessing a machine gun, even 90 of them. Williams is charged with 3 counts of false statements and with aiding and abetting. Prosecutors are also seeking forfeiture of at least 35 machine guns involved in the case. And you'd think that they would have a pretty good shot at getting a hold of those. We'll see how it goes. Let's roll the outro music here and see if the timing is right. And whether we get to the end here. Brad Wendt is charged with exploiting his position as chief of police to unlawfully obtain and sell guns for his own personal profit. Eugene Cowell, a senior FBI agent based in Omaha, said in a statement, "The FBI is committed to working with our law enforcement partners to investigate and hold accountable those who violate the oath of office and enrich themselves." Wendt was put on leave by the city in September after federal agents raided his gun stores and his city hall offices. That must have been some day. It is not clear if he remains employed with the city, which did not return an emailed message seeking comment. A phone number listed for the city clerk could not be connected. I'm not even certain what that's supposed to mean. The case against Wendt and Williams was not listed somehow in online court records Thursday afternoon, and it's not clear if either man has an attorney currently representing him. Maybe the plan is simply to machine gun everybody who would dare be on the jury and then see what happens from that point on. Well, thankfully they were serving and protecting everybody, and we should probably try and do that math. Can we do that quickly? 800 residents, 90 machine guns. That's going to take me a while to get the calculator open here. We got, we got the other way around. 800 divided by, so what is that? 8.8 residents per machine gun, I think. That's pretty good odds, I guess. If you're being invaded.
NetworksRadio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Okay, well, that's that. Good Friday to you then. From this point on, actually not Good Friday. How about Merry Christmas? That will be happening before we see you again on Boxing Day. Happy 8th night of Hanukkah coming up as well. Feliz Navidad. Kwanzaa on the way. We'll get together and celebrate come Monday. See you then.